Great. So I would like to first thank the AAAS and the Lemelson Foundation for the opportunity to talk with you today and to be a part of this amazing program. Fantastic individuals, fantastic focus, and delighted to be a part of it. So I did want to begin by saying the underlying theme for my story is that innovation lies at the boundaries of disciplines. And so if you think about that, what really underlies innovation is collaboration. And so I'd like to make that case for you by presenting my story. So my story begins as a graduate student at, this is not Troy, New York, if you know, this is Clemson, South Carolina, very beautiful location. I spent 6 years of my life as a graduate student there studying with this amazing inventor. And he was an interesting individual because he came from industry, which was very peculiar at the time, and in many cases, not highly thought of at the time, to sort of dilute the bounds of an academic institution. And so he was also a chemist, and yet he was leading engineers. I'm an engineer. My fellow colleagues, graduate students, were engineers. And so this was a very peculiar type of arrangement, which I did not appreciate until later. This is Dr. Shalaby. He was the inventor of record on hundreds of patents, and his specialty, he was basically, if you look up Webster's under absorbable, you will find his picture that says he developed many of the degradable biomedical systems. So in other words, implants that are placed in the body like a suture, they're degradable, they break down, and they're released from the body so that they don't require removal surgery. So again, an amazing individual with incredible insight. A meeting with Dr. Shalaby was sitting in a room with him. You felt you had his complete attention, both eyes, both ears on the game, but you could see sort of the wheels and the gears moving in his mind. And you could see the fact that he was miles down the road ahead of you, thinking ahead, what's the next innovation? What's the next innovation? What's the next innovation? And for those of us, and there were 23 of us that he mentored in a laboratory, doctoral and master's students, for those of us who were fortunate enough to work with him, it was an incredible experience, and he was a delight and an incredible mentor. And so the problem with that became, as I neared year 5.5 and graduated at year 6, I wondered, what in the world? How am I possibly going to, first of all, survive without him? And how will I develop ideas of my own? Because I very much wanted a faculty career, and I knew I had to have a portfolio of ideas upon which my students could build, and so that we could build and innovate and build. And so the question in my mind was, who am I? What is it I can do? What's my specialty? And so for the past 6 years, I've been working on creating bone pins and screws, degradable ones. So again, this idea of creating something that could be implanted in the body, in this case, materials that could be used to essentially seam broken bones together, and which would remain in the body long enough for the bone healing to occur, but which would be removed over time. And so it was a wonderfully fascinating project, but again, my fearless leader, Dr. Shalaby, was at the head of the project. And so I started thinking, I thought, okay, I'm a capable person. How could I possibly develop this idea as a faculty member? And I thought, okay, I've been working with grayish blue pens. I can make red pens. Or I can make a different color blue, or yellow, or green, and that was as far as I could get. I couldn't get any further than different colored pens. And the more I thought about it, the worse it got, the more frightening it got. And so I actually ended up, and I had this oh me, oh my moment that you see the prairie dog having in this particular slide, but I ended up opting into a postdoctoral fellowship. And there were 2 reasons. One was not such a good one. It was a delay tactic. Maybe if I spend another couple of years sort of pondering who I am, it will magically come to me in a dream, and I will wake up one morning full of ideas, and they will, by osmosis have arrived through my pillow. The other idea was that I really wanted to see the endpoint application. So again, I had worked for a chemist in an engineering environment, and I really wanted to work at a hospital and to see both surgeons and patients and the effect that the devices we built had upon those individuals. And so I signed on to a postdoctoral fellowship working for a clinical oncologist. He was a breast cancer specialist. And so his idea was that he wanted to create a biological material for women which could be implanted following a mastectomy or a lumpectomy. He wanted a degradable material. He wanted the degradable material to serve as a scaffold for cells that would be derived, normal healthy cells that would be taken from a woman who had cancer and would be combined and then implanted in that woman. He did not have a materials person or a chemist or an engineer in his group. And so I was delighted. This was a perfect opportunity to see the endpoint application and to play my delay game and figure out who am I. And so I was very excited launching this next path in my career. And so things went along very well for the first few months, and then I realized we were working with materials that really didn't make a lot of sense. And so I described them best as Swiss cheese-like. So they were porous. They were degradable materials that I could easily manufacture, and they were porous to allow cells that were taken from a patient and could be combined and then implanted. But it didn't make a lot of sense to implant that into a patient who had an irregular defect. It didn't make sense to the cells. The cells didn't like it. And so I questioned. Again, I started thinking, how can I make this different? And I went back to my earlier, I could make blue, I could make green, I could make yellow. And that was as far as it got. And that was very frustrating. And one day I came into work and I went about my usual activities. And I decided that day, I had asked ahead of time, could I shadow you, my mentor, in the operating room? And he thought that was a great idea, very welcoming, and so I did. And so I spent time in the operating room and actually watched the surgery. And again, I became frustrated because these were not the materials that were going to be successful for creating breast tissue. And on top of that, what I realized very clearly was this was a surgery, an additional surgery that required a scalpel and required implantation that was very invasive. And this was what we were proposing as a solution to women who had already been through both emotional turmoil and also had been through physical turmoil as well. We were adding one more assault to those women. And so I didn't feel that that was at all a good solution. And so after the surgery, I asked my mentor if there were ways that we could actually implant something in a minimally invasive fashion. So I had some ideas on the materials side, and I asked him, what are some of the instruments that exist already? Could we use something that already exists, and could I design a material to integrate with that particular instrument? And so he started describing, this was a hallway conversation, he started describing different instruments, and I'm a very visual person, so he did his best to describe. And I did my best not to understand, and he would describe some more, and I would still not understand. And finally, probably with exasperation, he said, you know, there's a huge storage room that we have where old equipment goes to die, or things that have been discarded, and so forth. So let's go check it out, and we can talk about this further. So we did. And so we camped out in a room that looked much like this, except there were boxes all over the floor as well. And so we camped out. He was on one side of the floor behind many piles of boxes, and I was on the other side of the floor, cross-legged behind many boxes. And we spent the time talking back and forth. And as we were talking, we couldn't see each other when we were cross-legged on the floor, so we would pop up. You know how prairie dogs do, as they pop up out of their holes in the prairie and then pop back down. And this was the image in my mind was we were like prairie dogs going back and forth. And so we were ripping open boxes, and he would hold up a piece of equipment, and he would describe how it was used. And I would counter with, oh, we could adapt it. Here's what we could do. And this went on for an hour or so, and we're going back and forth. And it was really a brainstorming session. And it was the most amazing time, because as this discussion was happening and realized not all the ideas were good, it went from flying pigs to things that were very realistic. The ideas, though, were forming in my mind of how the material would evolve in affiliation with the requirements that he was very clearly stating and the limitations that he was clearly stating that existed in the operating room. So with that, as this idea crystallized, we'd had about an hour of this, then I decided I would sort of describe this out loud. What do you think about X, Y, and Z? Here's what I'm seeing with the material. Here's how I think it could be injectable based on what we said. And he was so excited, he launched out of his prairie dog hole and said, I love engineers. And it was amazing because his enthusiasm overtook the room. And it told me in one moment, in that very one moment, that I was an important part of his team and he was an important part of my team. And without each other, we would not be able to innovate. And so it was collaboration in a sense, or what I call the prairie dog moment, that led to that particular idea and allowed us to move forward and really develop that idea. I also felt that up until that point, being the only engineer in the group, I'd felt an enormous amount of pressure, that the burden of the world was upon me to single-handedly create new and innovative ideas for this particular implant material. And I realized in that one moment, I love engineers, that it wasn't about me, it was about collaboration, and it was about talking with other people, many other people, and working with other people to create that moment, that intersection of disciplines. And so indeed, collaboration has become really the underlying theme for my work and the work of many, many others, and I claim for innovation in general. The innovation itself from that prairie dog moment in the storage room was an injectable material, and it actually was made up of degradable beads, so small beads, round beads that could be made in very different materials. So yes, I could make red, blue, green, and purple, but with a purpose now, not just for the sake of making them different. And so the purpose was that you can actually load different types of beads with different things. So if you wanted an anti-cancer agent, you could load a bead with that and have it release. You could also have the material, the beads, degrade at different time periods so that you have a timed disappearance of the beads. Again, they were combined with cells taken from a patient and then combined with a gel, a degradable gel, so that the whole system is a degradable material and cells. And so the degradable material stimulates the tissue to grow and develop into normal, healthy breast tissue as the material gradually degrades and is removed from the patient. So this was the foundation for my faculty career, and it was something that we were both very excited about, my postdoctoral fellow and I. And so I submitted a proposal to the National Science Foundation based upon this as a new faculty member. Walter was very much a part of that. He was the collaborating surgeon and allowed students to shadow him in the operating room, and he connected many, many other students with other surgeons at the hospital. And so it led to the Presidential Early Career Award, a turning point and a highlight in my career, a visit to the White House, which was really, it was an honorific moment for the idea, but more importantly, it was a launching pad for many things that resulted and many people who were influenced by one small prairie dog moment in a storage room at a hospital. And so specifically, there were many graduate students who have been a part of the work over the years and had thesis and dissertations based upon the ideas. We've reached many undergraduates who have had research projects, hundreds of K-12 students and their teachers who have learned about degradable materials and tissue engineering, and more than 11 disciplines have been involved in this particular work. And so I claim that one prairie dog moment led to the prairie dog moments of many, many others and the intersection of disciplines. So I urge you, the message is to celebrate the prairie dog moments and to actively look for the prairie dog moments and seek to have others involved in those moments as well. So again, innovation lies at the boundaries of disciplines, and collaboration is the underlying layer for innovation. So I'm looking forward very much to working with others and helping them find their prairie dog moments. Thank you for being here.